Two of the greatest thinkers in history revealed a secret about intelligence that can completely transform your life. When Napoleon Hill discovered the principles Nietzsche had already uncovered decades earlier, he was shocked by the truth. Powerful concepts came to light, and millions of lives were changed forever in ways no one could have predicted. What if everything you believed about intelligence was wrong? What if the smartest person in the room isn't the one with the highest IQ score, the most degrees hanging on their wall, or the quickest tongue in debate? What if true intelligence operates in shadows, moving like water through cracks in reality that others can't even see? You've been conditioned to recognize intelligence in its most obvious forms. The academic who recites facts like a walking encyclopedia, the entrepreneur who speaks in polished sound bites about market disruption, the scholar who drowns you in citations and references, building castles of borrowed wisdom. But what if these are merely the echoes of intelligence, not intelligence itself? Consider this moment right now. You're reading these words, but are you truly present? Are you absorbing the essence beneath the surface? Or are you skimming for quick insights to add to your mental collection? The way you engage with this very sentence reveals more about your intellectual capacity than any standardized test ever could. True intelligence doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't need to. It moves like fog rolling across a quiet lake at dawn, silent, pervasive, transforming everything it touches without calling attention to its presence. When you encounter it, you don't think, how smart. You think, how clear. You don't think, how impressive. You think, how inevitable. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying the minds of the most successful individuals of his era. Not just the wealthy or famous, but those who possessed something deeper, an ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to find opportunity. Where others found only obstacles, to remain calm in storms that would shatter lesser minds. What he discovered wasn't a collection of tricks or techniques, but a fundamental shift in how these individuals processed reality itself. And Nietzsche? He understood that intelligence without courage is merely decoration. That knowing without the will to act is just sophisticated ignorance. He saw through the comfortable lies that most people tell themselves about their own capabilities, recognizing that true intellectual power requires the strength to face uncomfortable truths and the discipline to rebuild yourself from the ground up when necessary. But here's what neither Hill nor Nietzsche could have anticipated: how modern society would weaponize the appearance of intelligence against intelligence itself. How we would create systems that reward performance over understanding, speed over depth, consensus over insight. How we would train entire generations to confuse information consumption with wisdom development. You live in an age where data flows like a torrential river, yet most people die of intellectual thirst. Where anyone can access the accumulated knowledge of human civilization in seconds, yet genuine understanding remains as rare as it was in ancient times. Where intelligence has been commoditized, packaged, and sold back to you as bite-sized content, designed to make you feel informed while keeping you intellectually dependent. The question isn't whether you're smart enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to abandon the comfortable illusions about how intelligence actually works. Are you willing to discover that your strongest intellectual muscles might be the ones you've never exercised? That your most powerful insights might emerge from the spaces between your thoughts rather than from the thoughts themselves? Intelligence, in its truest form, is not about accumulating knowledge. It's about developing the capacity to navigate uncertainty with grace. It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking questions that others are too afraid to voice. It's not about being right. It's about being useful to the larger patterns of growth and evolution that shape reality itself. When you watch a master chess player, you're not witnessing rapid calculation. You're observing someone who has learned to feel the weight of possibilities before they crystallize into specific moves. When you listen to a genuine innovator speak, you're not hearing clever arguments. You're experiencing someone who has learned to think alongside reality itself, following its natural currents rather than fighting against them. This is the intelligence that Hill and Nietzsche both recognized in their own ways. The intelligence that doesn't need to prove itself because it's too busy being useful. The intelligence that doesn't fear being wrong because it understands that error is just information traveling in an unexpected direction. The intelligence that doesn't compete with others, because it's engaged in the larger game of becoming who you're actually capable of being. But accessing this level of intellectual functioning requires you to give up something precious, the comfortable certainty that you already understand how your own mind works. You must become curious about your own blind spots. You must develop the courage to question not just what you think, but how you think, why you think it, and whether your thinking patterns are actually serving your highest potential. Most people treat their minds like appliances, turn them on when needed, expect them to perform basic functions, occasionally get frustrated when they don't work as expected. But your mind is not an appliance. It's more like a garden that grows wild if neglected, but can produce extraordinary beauty and nourishment when tended with skill and patience. The difference between ordinary thinking and true intelligence is the difference between using a tool and becoming an artist. Anyone can pick up a brush and apply paint to canvas, but an artist has learned to collaborate with the paint, the brush, the canvas, and the light in ways that allow something greater than the sum of the parts to emerge. Your thoughts are not just happening to you, they're happening through you, and you have far more influence over the quality, direction, and depth of your thinking than you've been taught to believe. But exercising this influence requires a different kind of effort than you're used to. It requires the kind of patient attention that our rapid-fire culture actively discourages. When was the last time you sat with a single question for hours without needing to find an immediate answer? When did you last allow yourself to be genuinely confused about something important without rushing to resolve the confusion? When did you last change your mind about something fundamental, not because someone convinced you with arguments, but because you discovered something new about how reality actually works? These aren't academic exercises. They're the basic calisthenics of intellectual development. Just as physical fitness requires you to regularly work against resistance, intellectual fitness requires you to regularly work with uncertainty, complexity, and the discomfort of not knowing. Hill understood that thoughts become things, but he also understood that most people think accidentally. They let their minds wander wherever circumstances push them, then wonder why their lives feel chaotic and reactive. Nietzsche saw that most people mistake their opinions for thoughts and their reactions for responses, then build entire identities around defending these mental accidents. True intelligence begins when you stop being the victim of your own mental processes and start becoming their conscious director, not through force or rigid control, but through the kind of gentle, persistent attention that a gardener brings to tending plants. You create conditions for growth rather than trying to force specific outcomes. This means learning to recognize the difference between thinking and worrying, between analysis and anxiety, between curiosity and compulsion. It means developing the capacity to pause between stimulus and response long enough to choose how you want to engage, rather than simply reacting from habit or emotion. The most intelligent people you'll ever meet have learned to think like scientists, about their own mental processes. They observe their own reactions with the same objective curiosity they would bring to studying an interesting natural phenomenon. They experiment with different approaches to problems, not to prove they're smart, but to discover what actually works. They remain open to evidence that contradicts their existing beliefs, because they're more committed to understanding reality than to defending their current understanding of it. But this kind of intellectual humility requires tremendous inner strength. It means being comfortable with not knowing, with being wrong, with having to revise your entire worldview when new information demands it. It means being more interested in being useful than in being right, more committed to growing than to maintaining your current sense of identity. The path to true intelligence isn't about becoming smarter than other people. It's about becoming smarter than your previous self. It's about developing the capacity to see patterns that were invisible to you yesterday, to ask questions that wouldn't have occurred to you last week, to respond to challenges in ways that would have been impossible for you last year. This kind of development doesn't happen through accumulating more information. It happens through refining the quality of your attention, deepening the sophistication of your awareness, and strengthening your capacity to remain present and responsive in Intelligence and its simulation becomes painfully clear. Those who have built their identity on the appearance of being smart find themselves completely unprepared for situations that require actually being intelligent. Their elaborate mental constructs collapse under the weight of circumstances that won't conform to their existing categories. Meanwhile, those who have quietly cultivated the deeper capacities of attention, curiosity, and responsiveness find themselves able to navigate complexity with a grace that seems almost magical to observers. They don't need to know everything in advance because they've developed the ability to learn in real time. They don't need to be right about everything because they're committed to being useful rather than impressive. This is the great intellectual deception of our time, the belief that intelligence is about having answers rather than developing the capacity to engage intelligently with questions, that it's about accumulating information rather than cultivating wisdom, that it's about defending what you know rather than remaining open to what you don't. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of this deception is how it makes people settle for so much less than their actual potential, how it convinces them that their current level of understanding is sufficient, their existing thinking patterns are adequate, their familiar responses to life's challenges are optimal. The truth is that your capacity for intelligence is not fixed. Your ability to understand complex situations, generate creative solutions, and respond wisely to unexpected challenges can continue developing throughout your entire life, but only if you're willing to give up the comfortable illusion that you already know enough, that you're already smart enough, that your current way of thinking is already sophisticated enough. This requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own mental processes. Instead of seeing them as possessions to be protected, you must begin seeing them as tools to be refined. Instead of defending your current understanding, you must become curious about its limitations. Instead of proving how smart you are, you must become committed to becoming smarter than you currently are. The question is not whether you're intelligent enough to make this shift. The question is whether you're courageous enough to admit that your relationship with intelligence might need to evolve. Whether you're willing to discover that true intellectual power comes not from what you know, but from how skillfully you can engage with what you don't know. What if you decided to approach intelligence as a practice rather than a possession? What if you chose to develop your capacity for understanding rather than just defending your current understanding? What if you became more interested in being genuinely helpful than in appearing impressively smart? What if you decided to make the shift from performing intelligence to embodying it? The ancient Stoic philosophers understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. Intelligence is not a thing you possess, but a quality of relationship you develop with reality itself. Epictetus taught that wisdom begins with recognizing the difference between what is within your control and what is not, but he went deeper than that simple distinction. He understood that true intellectual power emerges when you learn to work with the grain of reality rather than against it. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the territories of human consciousness, and what he discovered would revolutionize our understanding of how intelligence actually operates. He found that the most profound insights don't come from the ego mind's clever manipulations of information, but from what he called the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of pattern recognition that operates beneath the surface of conscious thought. Jung realized that genuine intelligence requires learning to collaborate with these deeper levels of awareness, rather than relying solely on surface-level cognition. Napoleon Hill interviewed over 500 of the most successful people of his era, and what he found wasn't a collection of smart individuals making clever decisions. He discovered people who had learned to align their thinking with what he called infinite intelligence, the organizing principles that govern success and failure, growth and decline, creation and destruction. These individuals had developed what Hill termed applied faith, not blind belief, but the intellectual courage to act in harmony with patterns they could sense, but not always explain. Viktor Frankl, emerging from the ultimate test of human intelligence, survival in a concentration camp, understood that the highest form of intellectual functioning isn't abstract reasoning, but meaning-making. He discovered that people could endure almost anything if they could find purpose in their suffering, and that this capacity to create meaning from experience represents the pinnacle of human intelligence. Frankl showed us that true intellectual power lies not in avoiding difficulties, but in transforming them into sources of wisdom and strength. Friedrich Nietzsche declared that what does not kill you makes you stronger. But his deeper insight was about the transformative power of intellectual courage. Nietzsche understood that most people live in what he called slave morality, accepting inherited beliefs, conventional wisdom, and social programming without ever questioning their validity. He saw that real intelligence requires the will to become who you actually are, rather than who others expect you to be, and that this process demands nothing less than the complete reconstruction of your relationship with truth itself. James Clear's research on habit formation reveals the mechanical foundation beneath all intellectual development. Clear demonstrates that your thinking patterns are essentially habits of attention, and that changing how you think requires the same systematic approach as changing any other behavior. But his deeper insight is that identity-based habits, changes rooted in who you want to become rather than what you want to achieve, create the foundation for sustainable intellectual transformation. What these great minds understood, each in their own way, is that intelligence operates according to discoverable principles. Just as there are laws governing physical reality, there are laws governing intellectual development. Just as you can learn to work with gravity rather than against it, you can learn to work with the natural patterns of learning, understanding, and insight rather than fighting them. The first principle is this: intelligence flows like water, always seeking the path of least resistance. But unlike water, which flows downward, intelligence flows toward truth, toward clarity, toward ever more elegant solutions to life's challenges. When you align your thinking with this natural flow, you discover that understanding emerges effortlessly. When you fight against it, by clinging to comfortable illusions, defending outdated beliefs, or forcing complex realities into simple categories, you create intellectual friction that exhausts your mental energy while producing little genuine insight. Think of your mind as a river system. When the channels are clear and unobstructed, water flows smoothly, carrying nutrients to where they're needed, removing waste products, maintaining the health of the entire ecosystem. But when the channels become clogged with debris, outdated assumptions, emotional attachments to being right, fear of admitting ignorance, the flow becomes turbulent, stagnant, ultimately toxic. The second principle is that intelligence requires the courage to remain uncertain. Most people treat uncertainty as a problem to be solved rather than a space to be explored. They rush to form opinions, to take positions, to reduce complex realities into simple categories they can understand and defend. But Socrates understood that wisdom begins with knowing that you don't know. And modern neuroscience confirms that the brain's capacity for learning is directly proportional to its tolerance for uncertainty. When you can remain comfortably uncertain, you create space for genuine insight to emerge. When you rush to premature certainty, you cut off the very process that could lead to deeper understanding. This doesn't mean becoming paralyzed by indecision or lost in endless analysis. It means developing the capacity to act decisively, even while remaining open to new information that might require you to adjust your approach. The third principle is that intelligence is fundamentally creative rather than merely analytical. Analysis takes things apart to understand their components. Creativity puts things together in new ways to generate fresh possibilities. Most educational systems emphasize analytical thinking while neglecting creative capacity, producing people who can criticize existing ideas but struggle to generate original ones. But the most profound form of intelligence synthesizes analysis and creativity into what Jung called active imagination, the ability to hold space for new possibilities to emerge while maintaining the discernment to evaluate their validity. This requires developing what Keats called negative capability, the ability to exist in uncertainty and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. Imagine your mind as a sculptor working with marble. The analytical mind examines the stone, identifies its flaws and strengths, plans the approach. But the creative mind sees the statue already hidden within the marble and knows exactly where to apply pressure to reveal it. True intelligence coordinates both capacities, using analysis to inform creativity and creativity to inspire analysis, in an ongoing dance of discovery and refinement. The fourth principle is that intelligence operates through patterns, not just content. Most people focus on accumulating information, facts, data, concepts, theories, but the intelligent person focuses on recognizing the patterns that connect different pieces of information into meaningful wholes. They understand that the same fundamental dynamics appear at every level of reality, from personal relationships to market forces to natural ecosystems. When you learn to see patterns, you develop what Napoleon Hill called the mastermind principle, the ability to synthesize insights from multiple sources into solutions that none of those sources could have generated individually. You begin to recognize that the principles governing success in one domain can often be adapted to entirely different domains. You realize that understanding how systems work is more valuable than memorizing what they produce. This pattern recognition operates like a compass for navigating complexity. Instead of getting lost in the overwhelming details of any particular situation, you can orient yourself by recognizing which fundamental patterns are at play. You can predict likely outcomes not through complex analysis, but through intuitive understanding of how similar patterns have played out in other contexts. The fifth principle is that intelligence requires embodiment, not just cognition. Nietzsche understood that the body thinks as much as the brain, that your emotional intelligence and somatic intelligence are just as important as your rational intelligence. Modern neuroscience confirms that the best decisions integrate input from multiple intelligence centers throughout your body, not just the prefrontal cortex. This means that developing true intelligence requires attending to your physical health, emotional regulation, and intuitive capacity with the same rigor you would apply to any intellectual discipline. It means recognizing that stress, fatigue, poor nutrition, and emotional turbulence all directly impact your ability to think clearly and make wise decisions. When you approach intelligence as a whole-body phenomenon rather than just a mental activity, you discover resources for insight and creativity that pure cognition alone cannot access. You learn to sense the rightness or wrongness of ideas, not just through logical analysis, but through their resonance with your deeper wisdom. You develop what Jung called psychological types, the ability to think with your entire being, rather than just your conscious mind. The sixth principle is that intelligence naturally seeks to serve something larger than itself. Viktor Frankl discovered that the human mind functions optimally when it's engaged in meaningful work that transcends personal self-interest. When intelligence becomes narcissistic, focused primarily on making you look smart or feel superior, it actually diminishes in power and effectiveness. But when you direct your intellectual capacities towards solving problems that matter, serving people you care about, or contributing to causes larger than your personal agenda, you tap into what Hill called infinite intelligence, a quality of thinking that seems to draw insights and solutions from sources beyond your individual knowledge and experience. This service orientation doesn't make you selfless or naive. Instead, it makes you more intelligent by connecting your thinking to the larger patterns of evolution and growth that govern all living systems. You begin to think in harmony with life itself rather than in opposition to it. You discover that the most elegant solutions serve multiple levels simultaneously. What's good for you is also good for others. What advances your interests also advances the common good. If surface-level thinking leads to fragmentation and conflict, then deep intelligence leads to integration and harmony. If reactive thinking leads to stress and exhaustion, then responsive thinking leads to flow and energy. If defensive thinking leads to stagnation and decline, then creative thinking leads to growth and expansion. These are not abstract philosophical principles, but practical laws that govern how consciousness operates in relationship to reality. When you violate them, you experience the friction of working against the grain of how intelligence naturally functions. When you align with them, You experience the effortless power that comes from working with the fundamental forces that shape thought, understanding, and insight. The ancient Chinese understood this as Wu Wei, effortless action that achieves maximum results with minimum force, not through passivity or laziness, but through such precise alignment with natural patterns that your actions become expressions of intelligence itself rather than impositions of personal will. This is the architecture of genuine understanding. Not a building you construct through accumulating information, but a capacity you develop through refining your relationship with the principles that govern how intelligence actually operates. Not something you achieve once and possess forever, but something you practice daily, moment by moment, in your ongoing engagement with the endless creativity and complexity of existence itself. When you understand these principles deeply enough to embody them naturally, you stop trying to be intelligent and simply become an expression of intelligence in action. You stop performing understanding and start living from understanding. You stop defending what you know and start discovering what you're capable of. Knowing? This is the foundation upon which everything else builds. These principles don't guarantee success in any conventional sense, but they guarantee that whatever you achieve will be authentic, sustainable, and genuinely useful. They ensure that your intelligence serves life rather than ego, growth rather than maintenance, truth rather than comfort. The question is not whether these principles are true. You can verify their validity through your own direct experience. The question is whether you're willing to reorganize your entire approach to thinking and learning around them. Whether you're ready to give up the familiar patterns that have gotten you this far in order to discover what becomes possible when you align your intelligence with the deeper patterns that govern reality itself. Stop theorizing about intelligence and start practicing it. Everything you've learned about the deeper principles of understanding means nothing if you don't translate it into concrete daily actions. True intelligence isn't a philosophy you contemplate. It's a discipline you embody through specific, repeated practices that gradually restructure how your mind operates at the most fundamental level. Start with the first practice. Cultivate strategic silence. Every day, multiple times throughout the day, practice the radical act of pausing before you respond. When someone asks your opinion, pause. When you feel the urge to demonstrate your knowledge, pause. When someone presents information that contradicts your existing beliefs, pause. When you're about to offer advice or criticism, pause. This isn't hesitation born from uncertainty. It's deliberate space-making born from wisdom. In that pause, you create room for actual intelligence to emerge rather than simply reacting from whatever mental programming happens to be activated by the situation. You interrupt the automatic patterns that keep most people trapped in mechanical responses and create space for genuine choice. When your colleague criticizes your project in a meeting, instead of immediately defending or counter-attacking, pause. Feel the impulse to react, acknowledge it, then ask yourself, what response would actually serve this situation rather than just protecting my ego? Often you'll discover that the most intelligent response is a question that helps everyone understand the issue more clearly, rather than a statement that proves you're right. When someone shares exciting news about their success, instead of immediately comparing it to your own achievements or offering advice they didn't request, pause. In that space, you might discover that the most intelligent response is simply witnessing their joy without needing to make it about you. You'll find that this quality of presence is far more valuable than any clever comment you might have made. When you encounter information that challenges your existing worldview, instead of immediately searching for ways to dismiss it or defend your current position, pause. Ask yourself, what if this information is pointing towards something important that I don't currently understand? This single practice will accelerate your intellectual development more than years of studying facts that confirm what you already believe. The second practice, question your questions. Most people accept their mental questions uncritically, never realizing that the quality of their questions determines the quality of their thinking. Every day, catch yourself in the act of asking automatic questions and deliberately reshape them into more useful forms. When you find yourself asking, why do I always struggle with this? Stop and reframe it as, what specific pattern in my approach to this challenge could I experiment with changing? The first question leads to self-criticism and victim mentality. The second leads to curiosity and creative problem-solving. When you catch yourself asking, "How can I prove I'm right about this?" transform it into, "What would I need to be wrong about for this other perspective to make sense?" This shift moves you from defensive thinking to exploratory thinking, from protecting your current understanding to expanding it. When you hear yourself asking, "What's wrong with these people?" change it to, "What am I not seeing about this?" Situation that would help me respond more effectively. This transforms judgment into investigation, complaint into curiosity, frustration into learning opportunity. Practice this throughout your day. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" ask, "How can I use this unexpected time in a way that serves my larger goals?" When you're dealing with a difficult person, instead of asking, "How can I get them to change?" ask, "How can I respond to them in a way that brings out their better nature?" The third practice, engage in productive confusion. Once each day, deliberately seek out something that genuinely confuses you. Not just information you don't know, but concepts that challenge your fundamental assumptions about how reality works. Then resist the urge to quickly resolve that confusion through familiar explanations or expert opinions. Read an article about a subject you think you understand well, but from a perspective that makes you uncomfortable. Watch a documentary about a political position you disagree with, but instead of looking for flaws in their arguments, try to understand the underlying concerns that make their position seem reasonable to them. Engage with a book that uses concepts you're not familiar with and sit with the confusion rather than immediately looking up definitions. When you encounter genuine confusion, the kind that makes you feel stupid or lost, celebrate it. This discomfort signals that you're at the edge of your current understanding, in the space where real learning happens. Most people flee from this feeling, rushing back to the comfortable territory of what they already know. But you're training yourself to become comfortable in this space of not knowing, because this is where intelligence actually develops. If you're discussing politics with someone who disagrees with you, instead of preparing counter-arguments while they speak, try to genuinely understand why an intelligent person might hold their position. What life experiences might have led them to these conclusions? What values are they prioritizing that you might not be considering? What concerns do they have that you might not share, but could at least understand? When you're learning a new skill, resist the urge to immediately apply familiar patterns from skills you already possess. Allow yourself to be genuinely bad at it for longer than feels comfortable. Let yourself experience the confusion of not knowing how to proceed, because this confusion is your mind creating new neural pathways rather than simply reinforcing existing ones. The fourth practice, practice intellectual archaeology. Every day, trace one of your strong opinions or beliefs back to its origin. Ask yourself, when did I first start believing this? What evidence convinced me? What assumptions am I making that I've never questioned? If I had to argue against this position, what would be my strongest arguments? This isn't about becoming wishy-washy or losing your convictions. It's about developing intellectual honesty. The capacity to hold your beliefs lightly enough that you can examine them objectively rather than defensively. Most people's strongest opinions are based on information they encountered years ago and never revisited, emotional reactions they never processed, or social pressures they never recognized. When you find yourself strongly disagreeing with something you read or hear, stop and ask, what would I need to believe about reality for this position to make perfect sense? This doesn't mean adopting beliefs you don't actually hold, but it means developing the capacity to think from multiple perspectives rather than being trapped in only one. When you notice yourself feeling superior to someone else's choices or lifestyle, pause and investigate that feeling. What assumptions are you making about what makes a life valuable or successful? Where did those assumptions come from? Are they actually serving you, or are they limiting your ability to learn from people who have chosen different paths? When you catch yourself dismissing an entire group of people as stupid, closed-minded, or wrong, challenge yourself to find at least one intelligent insight within their worldview. This practice develops what Buddhist teachers call beginner's mind, the humility and curiosity that allows you to learn from anyone, anywhere, regardless of their education level or social status. The fifth practice, create daily synthesis. At the end of each day, spend 10 minutes identifying connections between apparently unrelated things you encountered. What does your conversation with your neighbor have in common with the article you read about neuroscience? How might the pattern you noticed in your work project apply to your approach to physical fitness? What does your frustration with technology teach you about your expectations in relationships? This practice develops what systems thinkers call pattern recognition, the ability to see underlying dynamics that appear across different domains of experience. Instead of treating each experience as isolated and unique, you begin recognizing the deeper structures that organize reality at every level. When you're dealing with a conflict at work, ask yourself how the same dynamics might play out in international relations, family systems, or ecological relationships. When you're learning a new concept in one field, explore how similar principles might apply in completely different areas. When you notice a successful strategy in business, investigate how the same approach might improve your health, relationships, or creative projects. This isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's training your mind to think systemically rather than compartmentally. You begin to see how everything is connected to everything else, which dramatically increases your ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. If a relationship conflict is draining your energy, apply the same principles you would use to optimize a manufacturing process. Where are the inefficiencies? What inputs are producing unwanted outputs? How could you restructure the system to produce better results with less effort? This isn't about treating people mechanically, but about recognizing that the same principles that govern effective systems apply whether you're dealing with machines, organizations, or human interactions. Remember, these practices work through repetition, not through perfection. You're not trying to execute them flawlessly from the beginning. You're building new neural pathways through consistent practice, the same way you would build physical strength through regular exercise. Some days will feel more successful than others, but the cumulative effect of daily practice is what creates lasting transformation. Start with whichever practice feels most accessible to you right now, and add the others gradually as they become natural. The goal isn't to add more complexity to your life, but to replace unconscious mental habits with conscious ones, to trade automatic reactions for intelligent responses, to transform your mind from a collection of inherited patterns into a skillfully crafted instrument for engaging with reality. When you consistently apply these practices, you'll begin to notice changes in how you think, how you feel, and how others respond to you. Your conversations become more interesting because you're more interested. Your problems become more solvable because you're approaching them with greater creativity and flexibility. Your relationships improve because you're responding to people from understanding rather than assumption. But more importantly, you'll begin to experience the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've developed the capacity to engage intelligently with whatever questions arise. Not because you're smarter than other people, but because you've learned to use your intelligence in service of wisdom rather than ego. These practices don't require special circumstances or additional time commitments. They transform the moments you're already living, the conversations you're already having, the challenges you're already facing. They turn your ordinary daily experience into a laboratory for developing extraordinary intellectual capacity. The question isn't whether you have time for these practices. The question is whether you can afford not to implement them, whether you're willing to continue operating from unconscious mental patterns that may be limiting your potential, or whether you're ready to take conscious control of your intellectual development. Your intelligence is not a fixed resource. It's a dynamic capacity that can continue growing throughout your entire life, but only if you're willing to practice it deliberately, consistently, and with the kind of patient attention that allows profound changes to emerge naturally over time. You are the river and the riverbank, the current and the stone, the flow and the form. Deep intelligence moves through you like water finding its way to the sea, not through force or struggle, but through an unwavering commitment to its natural direction. Watch how water responds to obstacles. It doesn't fight them. It doesn't ignore them. It doesn't collapse in defeat. It simply finds a way around, over, under, or through, always maintaining its essential nature while adapting its form to whatever reality presents. This is the first living metaphor that will transform how you understand your own intellectual capacity. You are not a container trying to hold intelligence. You are a flowing system through which intelligence moves. When you try to grasp understanding like a possession, you create the very resistance that blocks its natural flow. When you try to force insights through mental effort alone, you create turbulence that muddies the clarity you're seeking. But when you learn to move like water, responsive rather than reactive, persistent rather than pushy, flexible rather than rigid, you discover that intelligence isn't something you must struggle to acquire. It's something that naturally emerges when you stop interfering with its flow. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You have to be the most permeable, the most willing to allow insight to move through you without claiming ownership of it. Consider how a river shapes landscapes over time, not through dramatic force but through gentle, consistent pressure, applied in the same direction day after day, year after year. A river doesn't exhaust itself trying to move mountains in a single day. It knows that steady flow, maintained over time, can carve canyons through solid rock. This is how true intelligence works in your life, not through bursts of brilliant performance, but through consistent application of clear thinking, patient attention, and responsive action. When you encounter resistance in your learning, don't try to blast through it like a fire hose. Instead, flow around it like water, finding the small gaps and weak points where understanding can begin to penetrate. When you face criticism or opposition, don't become rigid in defense of your position. Let the feedback flow through you, carrying away whatever no longer serves, while leaving behind the valuable minerals that will nourish your growth. The river teaches you that intelligence is not about having all the answers immediately available. It's about trusting your capacity to find solutions as they become necessary, one situation at a time, one challenge at a time. A river doesn't carry all the water it will ever need at once. It receives and releases, in an ongoing dance with the larger systems of which it's a part. When you align with this river nature of intelligence, you stop trying to prove how smart you are and start demonstrating how useful you can be. You stop hoarding insights like a dam and start sharing them freely, knowing that the more you give away, the more space you create for fresh understanding to flow through you. You discover that your greatest intellectual power lies not in what you can accumulate, but in what you can transmit, not in what you can grasp, but in what you can embody and express. You are also the lighthouse standing patient and unshakable on the rocky shore of circumstance. While storms of confusion rage around you, while waves of emotional reactivity crash against your foundation, while winds of social pressure attempt to blow you off course, you remain steady in your essential purpose, to be a source of clarity in times of darkness, guidance in times of uncertainty, stability in times of chaos. This is the second living metaphor that will anchor your identity in something deeper than intellectual performance. True intelligence isn't about being the brightest light in every situation. It's about being the most reliable light when others need guidance. It's not about outshining everyone around you, but about maintaining your own inner clarity, regardless of what's happening in your external environment. The lighthouse doesn't chase ships to offer its guidance. It doesn't move from location to location seeking recognition for its service. It doesn't compete with other lights or worry about whether its beam is noticed and appreciated. It simply maintains its position and broadcasts its signal with absolute consistency, trusting that those who need guidance will find their way to its light. When you embody this lighthouse quality of intelligence, you stop needing external validation for your insights. You stop trying to convince people who aren't ready to understand. You stop exhausting yourself, attempting to illuminate minds that have chosen to remain in darkness. Instead, you focus your energy on maintaining the clarity and strength of your own inner light, knowing that this is the greatest service you can offer. This doesn't make you passive or withdrawn. A lighthouse is intensely active, constantly generating and broadcasting its signal, constantly scanning the horizon for ships that might need guidance, constantly maintaining the mechanisms that allow it to serve its purpose. But its activity is focused, purposeful, and sustainable rather than scattered, desperate, and exhausting. When storms of criticism or controversy swirl around you, you remain grounded in your deeper understanding rather than being blown about by every changing wind of opinion. When others panic in the face of uncertainty, you maintain your calm presence, not because you know all the answers, but because you trust your capacity to find whatever clarity is needed as situations unfold. The lighthouse teaches you that true intellectual strength comes from depth rather than height, from rootedness rather than mobility, from consistency rather than brilliance. You don't need to be the most spectacular mind in your environment. You need to be the most trustworthy one, the one that others can count on to provide perspective when they're lost in confusion or overwhelmed by complexity. When you align with this lighthouse nature of intelligence, you stop trying to save everyone from their own confusion and start offering the kind of steady presence that allows others to find their own way to clarity. You become a reference point rather than a rescuer, a source of stability rather than a supplier of answers, a beacon of possibility rather than a repository of certainty. You are also the master sculptor, patient and purposeful before the raw marble of your own potential. Every day you approach the ongoing work of shaping your mind with the same reverence that Michelangelo brought to revealing David from within the stone. You understand that the masterpiece is not something you impose upon the material, but something you discover already present within it, waiting to be revealed through skillful removal of everything that doesn't belong. This is the third living metaphor that will transform your relationship with your own intellectual development. You are not a victim of your mental limitations, struggling against fixed constraints of talent or circumstance. You are an artist working with the magnificent raw material of your own consciousness, and every thought you think, every question you ask, every challenge you engage with, is another precise strike of the chisel, gradually revealing the extraordinary intelligence that has always been your birthright. The sculptor doesn't hurry. Each strike of the chisel is deliberate, informed by deep understanding of both the material and the vision. Some strokes remove large chunks of unnecessary stone. Others refine subtle details that will make the difference between good craftsmanship and transcendent art. The sculptor trusts the process, knowing that mastery emerges through the accumulation of countless small, skillful actions rather than through dramatic gestures or sudden breakthroughs. When you approach your own intellectual development with this sculptor's patience and precision, you stop being frustrated by how slowly insight develops. Instead, you become fascinated by the gradual emergence of capacities that were always potential within you, but needed careful cultivation to become actual. You stop comparing your work in progress with others' finished pieces and start appreciating the unique beauty of your own unfolding. The sculptor knows that some days the work flows easily, and other days every strike feels awkward and imprecise. But regardless of how the work feels in any particular moment, the sculptor shows up consistently, applies the tools skillfully, and trusts that each session contributes to the larger vision, even when individual progress isn't visible. When you face intellectual challenges that seem beyond your current capacity, you don't conclude that you lack talent or intelligence. Instead, you recognize that you're working on a particularly challenging section of the sculpture, one that requires patience, persistence, and perhaps the development of more refined tools and techniques. You see obstacles not as evidence of limitation, but as information about what aspects of your intelligence need more careful attention. The sculptor works from both the macro vision and the micro detail simultaneously. They hold the image of the completed masterpiece while attending carefully to the particular angle of the chisel, the specific quality of this grain of stone, the immediate feedback from this particular strike. This teaches you to balance your large aspirations for intellectual growth with careful attention to the small daily practices that actually create that growth. When you align with this sculptor nature of intelligence, you stop trying to rush your development and start appreciating the artistic process of gradually refining your mental capacities. You understand that your mind is your masterpiece, that your life is your laboratory, and that every experience is raw material for the ongoing work of becoming who you're capable of being. These three metaphors, the flowing river, the steady lighthouse, the patient sculptor, offer you different ways of understanding and embodying the deeper truth about intelligence. You are not separate from intelligence, struggling to acquire it from external sources. You are intelligence itself, learning to recognize and express its own nature more clearly and powerfully. Sometimes you need to flow like water, adapting and responding with fluid grace to whatever circumstances present. Sometimes you need to stand like a lighthouse, maintaining your clarity and purpose regardless of external turbulence. Sometimes you need to work like a sculptor, patiently refining your capacities through skillful daily practice. But always, you are participating in the larger intelligence that moves through all of life. The organizing principle that turns acorns into oak trees, transforms stars into solar systems, and evolves consciousness toward ever greater complexity and beauty. Your individual intelligence is not separate from this cosmic intelligence, but is its local expression, its way of knowing itself through your particular perspective and experience. When you deeply understand this, you stop trying to be intelligent and simply allow intelligence to be itself through you. You stop performing understanding and start living from understanding. You stop defending your limitations and start exploring your potential. You become a conscious participant in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself, and that participation is the highest expression of intelligence possible. The river, the lighthouse, and the sculptor are not just metaphors for how intelligence works. They are templates for who you can become. Templates that invite you to embody the flowing responsiveness of water, the steady clarity of light, and the patient mastery of the artist. Templates that remind you that your greatest intellectual achievement will not be accumulating more knowledge, but becoming a more elegant expression of the wisdom that seeks to know itself through your life. This is your true identity. Not someone who has intelligence, but someone through whom intelligence expresses its deepest nature. Not someone who must prove their worth through intellectual performance, but someone whose very existence is a contribution to the ongoing evolution of understanding itself. Not someone limited by current capacities, but someone whose potential unfolds eternally, like a river flowing toward the sea, like a lighthouse broadcasting its signal into infinite darkness, like a sculptor revealing the timeless beauty that waits within the stone. In the silence between your thoughts lies a power that most people never discover. While they fill every moment with mental noise, analyzing, judging, planning, worrying, commenting, you can learn to access the spacious awareness from which all thoughts arise and into which they dissolve. This is not emptiness, but fullness. Not absence, but presence. Not void, but the creative source from which genuine intelligence emerges. Master the strategic use of silence, and you will possess a secret weapon that operates beneath the radar of ordinary consciousness. When others rush to fill conversational gaps with nervous chatter, you remain comfortable in the pause, allowing space for deeper insights to surface. When teams reach apparent deadlocks in problem-solving, you resist the urge to force solutions, and instead create silence that allows collective wisdom to emerge. This is not passive withdrawal, but active presence. You're not checking out from engagement, but checking into a deeper level of awareness. You're not avoiding participation, but participating from a place of greater clarity and power. The silence you cultivate becomes a source of intellectual strength that others can sense even when they can't explain it. Practice this daily. When someone asks you a direct question, pause for 3 full seconds before responding, even when you know the answer immediately. In those 3 seconds, scan for a response that serves the highest good of the situation rather than just demonstrates your knowledge. Often you'll discover that the best response is another question that helps everyone think more clearly about what's really being asked. When you're in meetings where everyone is talking past each other, try this. Say nothing for 10 minutes, while paying exquisite attention to the underlying dynamics at play. Who is trying to be heard but not being acknowledged? What fears are driving the surface-level arguments? What shared concerns could unite the apparent opponents? Then, when you do speak, Address these deeper patterns rather than the surface content. Watch how your words carry more weight, because they emerge from genuine understanding rather than reactive positioning. Cultivate silence as your secret laboratory for insight development. Instead of immediately filling your mental space with podcasts, music, or news when you're commuting, cleaning, or exercising, allow your mind to wander freely in unstructured silence. This is where your unconscious mind processes information, makes unexpected connections, and generates the creative solutions that can't be forced through conscious effort. The second dimension of transcendent intelligence is learning to hold your goals and outcomes lightly rather than desperately. Most people strangle their own potential by gripping their desired results so tightly that they lose the flexibility necessary to recognize and respond to emerging opportunities. They become so attached to their plan, working exactly as conceived, that they miss the signals reality is sending about better possibilities. Detach from expectations while remaining fully committed to excellent action. This paradox is the hallmark of mature intelligence. You care deeply about serving the highest good while caring very little about whether your specific ideas are adopted, your particular approaches are validated, or your individual contributions are recognized. You become like a master gardener who plants seeds with total attention and care, then releases attachment to exactly how or when they will grow. This detachment doesn't make you passive or indifferent. Instead, it makes you infinitely more responsive because you're not constantly defending predetermined positions. When circumstances shift, you adapt smoothly. When new information emerges, you integrate it naturally. When better approaches become apparent, you pivot gracefully. Your energy flows toward effectiveness rather than being trapped in the ego's need to be right. Practice this through daily micro-detachments. When you share an idea in conversation, notice your attachment to having others agree with it. Practice offering your perspective as a gift rather than a position to be defended. When you're working on projects, regularly ask yourself, if this doesn't work out as planned, what might emerge that could be even better? This keeps you aligned with reality's creative flow rather than fighting against it when it doesn't conform to your preferences. When you encounter criticism or rejection of your ideas, use it as an opportunity to practice non-attachment. Instead of automatically defending your position, pause and ask, what if this feedback is pointing towards something important that I'm not seeing? This doesn't mean accepting all criticism uncritically, but it means remaining open to the possibility that resistance might contain valuable information about how to improve your approach. The third dimension is establishing daily disciplines that maintain your connection to the deeper sources of intelligence. These are not mechanical routines, but living practices that keep you aligned with the qualities of consciousness that generate insight, wisdom, and understanding. Begin each day with 5 minutes of gratitude practice, but not the superficial listing of things you appreciate. Instead, practice feeling grateful for your capacity to grow, learn, and contribute. Feel grateful for the challenges that are developing your intelligence, for the confusion that is expanding your understanding, for the difficulties that are strengthening your character. This shifts your relationship with experience from resistance to collaboration, from fighting reality to working with it. Practice this form of gratitude. Instead of being grateful for getting what you want, be grateful for becoming who you need to be to handle whatever you get. Instead of being grateful for easy circumstances, be grateful for your capacity to find wisdom in difficult ones. Instead of being grateful for being right, be grateful for opportunities to discover where you might be wrong. This deeper gratitude aligns you with the growth-oriented intelligence that governs all evolution. Integrate brief meditation periods throughout your day, not as escape from activity, but as return to the source of all effective action. Set 3. Random alarms on your phone. When they ring, stop whatever you're doing and spend 60 seconds in complete presence, feeling your breath, sensing your body, observing your thoughts without getting caught in them. This regular return to presence keeps you connected to the awareness from which genuine intelligence operates. During these micro-meditations, practice what Zen masters call don't know mind, deliberately releasing your need to have everything figured out and returning to the fresh openness of not knowing. This isn't ignorance, but intelligent humility, the recognition that your current understanding is always incomplete, and that staying open to new information is more valuable than defending existing conclusions. Develop a daily practice of auto-control, not through rigid suppression of impulses, but through conscious choice about where to direct your mental and emotional energy. When you feel the urge to check social media, pause and ask, will this actually serve my growth, or am I just seeking distraction? When you want to complain about something, pause and ask, would it be more useful to focus this energy on solution finding instead? This auto-control extends to your thinking patterns. When you catch your mind spiraling into worry, redirect it toward planning. When you notice yourself rehearsing old resentments, redirect toward gratitude for lessons learned. When you find yourself fantasizing about future achievements, redirect toward present moment action that makes those achievements more likely. You're not suppressing these mental tendencies, but consciously choosing which ones deserve your attention and energy. Practice intellectual auto-control by regularly examining your information diet. Just as you wouldn't eat junk food at every meal and expect to maintain physical health, you can't consume mental junk food constantly and expect to maintain intellectual clarity. Choose your inputs deliberately. Read books that challenge your thinking rather than just confirm your existing beliefs. Engage with people who think differently than you do rather than just surrounding yourself with ideological agreement. Seek out complexity rather than fleeing to oversimplified explanations. Now let's gather the essential threads of this journey together. You began by recognizing that true intelligence operates beneath the surface of performance and credentials, that it flows like water toward truth, rather than fighting to maintain comfortable illusions. You discovered that most people mistake the appearance of intelligence for its reality, creating elaborate performances that actually block the very understanding they claim to possess. You learned that genuine intelligence operates according to discoverable principles. It requires courage to remain uncertain, flows naturally toward creative synthesis, recognizes patterns across different domains, integrates mind and body, and seeks to serve something larger than personal ego. These aren't abstract philosophies, but practical laws that govern how consciousness actually functions when it's operating at its highest capacity. You were given specific daily practices for embodying these principles, cultivating strategic silence, questioning your questions, engaging productively with confusion, practicing intellectual archaeology, and creating daily synthesis. These aren't activities you add to your already busy life, but ways of transforming the moments you're already living into, opportunities for intellectual development. You explored 3 living metaphors that anchor your identity in the deeper truth about intelligence. You are the river of responsive flow, the lighthouse of steady clarity, and the sculptor of patient mastery. These images provide templates for who you can become rather than limitations based on who you've been, and now you understand that the highest form of intelligence transcends the need to be intelligent, expressing itself through silence, non-attachment, and the daily disciplines that maintain your connection to the source of all genuine understanding. But understanding these concepts means nothing if you don't implement them. Knowledge without application is just sophisticated entertainment. Insight without action is just elaborate procrastination. The question is not whether you now understand how intelligence really works. The question is whether you will commit to the daily practice of embodying that understanding. Start today. Choose one practice from each chapter and implement it immediately. Not next week when you have more time, not next month when you're less busy, not next year when circumstances are more favorable. Now. This moment. This decision to begin is itself an expression of the intelligence you're seeking to develop. When someone irritates you today, practice strategic silence before responding. When you encounter information that conflicts with your existing beliefs, practice productive confusion rather than defensive dismissal. When you feel the urge to prove how smart you are, practice offering genuine service instead. When you catch your mind wandering toward worry or complaint, practice gratitude for your capacity to redirect your attention consciously. These may seem like small steps, but they are precisely the kind of small steps that compound over time into profound transformation. Just as a river carves canyons through persistent flow, just as a lighthouse guides countless ships through consistent service, just as a sculptor reveals masterpieces through patient practice, you will develop extraordinary intelligence through ordinary daily commitment to conscious mental development. The world needs the kind of intelligence you're capable of developing. Not because it needs you to be smarter than other people, but because it needs more people who can think clearly under pressure, respond wisely to complexity, and collaborate intelligently with the larger patterns that govern reality itself. Your intellectual development is not just personal improvement, it's your contribution to the collective intelligence that our species needs to navigate the challenges ahead. You don't need permission to begin this work. You don't need perfect conditions or ideal circumstances. You don't need to wait until you feel ready or qualified. You need to start where you are with what you have, using whatever capacity you currently possess to develop the capacity you're ultimately capable of expressing. The practices will seem difficult at first because they require you to work against the momentum of unconscious mental habits that have been operating for years or decades. But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. Just as your muscles grow stronger by working against resistance, your intelligence grows clearer by working consciously with the resistance of unconscious patterns. When you master the principles and practices outlined in this journey, when you embody the flowing responsiveness of water, the steady clarity of light and the patient mastery of the artist, when you operate from silence rather than noise, from service rather than ego, from discipline rather than impulse, nothing, and no one will be able to shake you. Not because you'll have all the answers, but because you'll have developed the capacity to engage intelligently with whatever questions arise. Not because you'll be the smartest person in every situation, but because you'll be the most useful one. Not because life will become easy, but because you'll have become skillful enough to find opportunity within every challenge and wisdom within every difficulty. This is mastery, not the elimination of problems, but the development of intelligence sophisticated enough to transform any problem into a pathway for growth. Not the achievement of perfect understanding, but the cultivation of perfect willingness to learn. Not the accumulation of knowledge, but the embodiment of wisdom. Your journey into true intelligence begins now. Every moment offers you another opportunity to practice conscious thinking rather than automatic reaction. Every interaction gives you another chance to respond from wisdom rather than impulse. Every challenge presents another laboratory for developing the kind of intelligence that serves life rather than just ego. When you dominate true intelligence in this way, nothing and no one will be able to shake you.